I think the best leaders over time have always spent time on thinking about their people in one way or another. And the truth is, understanding what motivates your people is just good business.
On this episode of Executive Edge, Simon is joined by James Root, a senior partner at Bain Company.
We had to integrate our thinking about future workforce with our redesign of workflows in order to get maximum benefit over time.
James explores how organizations must rethink leadership, talent management, and motivation in a rapidly changing AI-driven business environment.
We routinely sort of overestimate the degree of kind of job decimation or annihilation that comes from new technology. My picture of the future is very much one in which humans are still engaged in collaboration with robots, with AI systems of one type and another.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Executive Edge, here with your host, Simon Rycraft. Excited to have with me a consulting legend, I'll put it, James Root. So appreciate you coming on, James. Thank you.
My pleasure.
So James is a senior partner at Bain Company, one of the top 3 consulting companies in the world. And also the author of a recently published book called The Archetype Effect, which we are going to go into, that I have my notes and cheat sheet right next to me as well. During James's 30 years at Bain, he's lived and worked across Europe, North America, and Asia, currently residing in Hong Kong. James has served as the managing partner of the New York office, as the leader of the Asia Pacific organization practice, but also as the chairman of the firm's global nominating committee. James has been both published and featured in media across platforms such as the Harvard Business Review, Wall Street Journal, CNN, CNBC, and Bloomberg, and others. James is a fellow of Hughes Hall College at Cambridge University in the UK, an adjunct professor at Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, and a guest lecturer of business and finance at Waseda University in Tokyo. All very impressive stuff. So thank you again, James. We appreciate you coming on.
Thank you, Simon.
Let's jump in. I mean, I think your global experience is extremely extensive and impressive, and obviously with the executive audience that we have, everyone is going through some unusual times. If you look at today's business environment, and then also reflect back on the past 3 to 4 decades, is there a legacy assumption perhaps that large organizations still carry with them today, that you think organizations and executives would ultimately need to unlearn in order to be effective in the future? There's a lot of companies and logos that were prominent 20, 30 years ago that aren't around now, some that still are. Is there any kind of lessons that you pull from your work with senior execs around the world?
It's a very complicated question that you start with. No surprise there, but I'm going to offer a couple of thoughts. I don't think I can boil it down to one. I do think the things I'm going to mention are linked, though. Right now, I think that there is an idea, very powerful idea, to do with the decoupling of the growth of revenue and the growth of costs. And don't get me wrong. If you make things in a manufacturing plant and then you ship them around, I'm not suggesting for a second that, the cost of your inputs or the cost of the transportation is going to go to zero in terms of its growth. But tech forward companies are investing heavily, mostly through AI, to decouple those two phenomena, the growth of revenue and the growth of cost. And we've already seen some incredible quarterly prints that demonstrate how that can work. And that tends to be something that other firms, legacy firms, will try to understand and, to the extent that they can, imitate in the future. It's a big change. That's one. 2 relates to people, which will bring us a little bit more into the bullseye of the book. The prevailing assumption, I think, on talent management for 50 years has been everybody in the firm, labor or management or labor becoming management, is just trying to trudge up the ladder. Everybody wants to climb, have more, wider spans, more layers between them and the entry level. And that's just the motivation that applies to absolutely everybody. And I think it is undeniably the case that is not true anymore. It may never have been true, but it certainly is not true today. And so, again, forward-thinking companies are trying to adapt and adjust the talent systems to reflect that a much greater diversity of motivations than the old models of talent management used to apply.
And reflecting on that presumably also is super critical. And we'll get into some of the details in your book as well, but super critical in how to motivate, lead, especially in today's current environment where there's anxiety, not just amongst shareholders in the marketplace, uncertainty around the world and broader, supply chains and consumers, but also within the ranks, right? People see major layoff announcements going out. There's a lot of unknown with the onslaught potentially of AI and the innovation and investment going into that space, and what will it ultimately mean. So I think your point is extremely timely. I did want to read something from your book, and it opens up, right at the beginning of chapter 1, subtitled "Old Norms and New Norms." And it really, for me at least anyway, it set the scene for just a kind of a reality check, potentially, of what organizations are going through and potentially what employees are having to face. So I just want to read on that and then kind of get your kind of broader expansion and thoughts. But James writes here, in 1930, John Maynard Keynes predicted the continued economic growth over the course of the 20th century would reduce the work week to 15 hours, which, ultimately I think everyone knows has not happened yet. In 1959, the US Postmaster General predicted that today's mail would be sent by rockets. Again, he obviously predicting delivery drones, but even that promise has not taken effect. In 1964, the Rand Corporation predicted that by 2020, which has already passed, we would be breeding intelligent apes to perform manual labor. And just the parallels in reading that to what we're going through and have been going through in the last 24 months is both iconic and ironic at the same time. So is that something that is broadly understood, do you think, with the organizations and the executives that you're chatting to? Is that the current evolutions that have been happening, the challenges that they're facing, aren't necessarily as dramatic as we'll look back on in 20, 30 years? Or do people see this as being different?
So the point about those slightly tongue-in-cheek references is that we routinely get these predictions about the end of all work wrong. That having been said, we're in the phase, I think, of AI and the kind of the stress or excitement it's causing in the workforce in terms of all sorts, whether they're using it or not really, of saying, I don't know, is this the big one? It certainly feels like there is a group of people who look at the future and see the sort of the famous scenes from one of my favorite movies, WALL-E, where the citizens of the executive starliner Axiom are just on their floating hover chairs, morbidly obese and completely dependent on the machines, endlessly entertained by their screens, and then they're not doing any work at all. There is a group of people who feel that that's the future. I'm not in that group. But I think we're at the stage of not knowing. You see the announcements every day about new waves of particularly middle management job reductions, and that's going to affect a lot of households around the world. But I do think this is different in the sense that AI can make its own decisions and it can build its own things. The printing press couldn't do that. Even the internet couldn't do that. So there are definite differences. But again, I'll finish where I started, which is we routinely sort of overestimate the degree of kind of job decimation or annihilation that comes from new technologies. And my picture of the future is very much one in which humans are still engaged in collaboration with robots, with AI systems of one type and another. But we have to work on workflows and workforce adjustments at the same time. At the moment, we're not really doing that. We have interesting use cases being built in firms and sort of not necessarily scaling in a way that people eventually will be able to do it. And I think we have to integrate our thinking about future workforce with our redesign of work flows in order to get maximum benefit over time.
And I think part of the reason that, I reached out and then we started this conversation, I think is, what you touch on with the book and also some of the talks that I've seen online, isn't being discussed as much as it potentially should be, right? Everyone is focusing on the shiny object, right? The technology, but in order for the organizations to adapt, to be able to embrace this evolving technology, they also need to understand how that will change the human element of the business, which isn't ultimately going to be eradicated, and the psychology of that new workforce and how they need to be motivated in the future state. And I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, maybe industrial revolution is probably any other time to reflect back on, but I don't know that executives have had to adapt that quickly ever before, at least in their career, to the changes that are happening now. I mean, these things are just, last 12 months has been a complete whirlwind, right? So there's a lot of catch up that's happening, and maybe that's the reason that they haven't been thinking in depth around, changes to leadership and motivation, amongst the workforce in general. Do you think?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so the rate of change is extraordinarily challenging, I think, for many firms. I don't think that we suddenly need to ask all of our CEOs and C-suite members to become professional psychologists. I don't believe that. I think the best leaders over time have always spent time on thinking about their people in one way or another. I definitely think there's less room in the C-suite now for people who don't do that. I shan't name names, but the sort of the legacy of sort of some of the most least people-oriented CEOs that we could probably come up with a shared list of those. But I think there's less room for that. And the truth is, understanding what motivates your people is just good business, even if you sometimes choose to ignore it. I mean, there are plenty of examples I see in my clients where I understand that person is an operator or is a giver or is an artisan, but the demands of this week's deliverables are such that I'm going to say to that person, sorry, I can't let you leave at 5 o'clock to pick up Jimmy from football because we have a deliverable on Monday morning, or whatever it might be. But it's an awareness that the team leaders and ultimately the firm leaders will bring to their task of leadership, I think, in a way that they haven't done necessarily always historically.
So if we take a step back as well, you could have written a book on any topic, in that's economics or leadership or organization effectiveness. Why this? What kind of drew you to this particular topic, and kind of why now?
I think work is very stressy and a bit messy for lots of people at the moment, and I'm dispirited by the data that comes out of Gallup every year. I'm sure you know Gallup. It's a research firm, and every year they publish something that lots of us who are interested in this topic look at. One of whose data points relates to the number of people who are stressed out at work, and routinely now, it's in the sort of 40% range. So what is that about? How can that possibly be? And by the way, the research that we've done, because all of the things in the book are predicated on some proprietary research that we've done at Bain, exactly the same number, about 40%, 41% of the people we talked to around the world said the same thing. So 3.5 billion of people went to work today. That's my rough estimate, which means 2 billion of them were stressed out or disengaged or somehow struggling at work. It just seems, surely we can do better than that, can't we? And then at a micro level, so that's a kind of macro, just statistics. But at a micro level, at my clients, over the decades, I've seen, these waves of automation around the human resource management function, whether that's putting things into shared services centers, in some cases, then outsourcing them to third parties, just increasingly putting more distance between the individuals and the systems that manage those individuals. And I'm not naive. I mean, I've worked on thousands of cost reduction programs in my time, as we all do as consultants, and I'm all in favor. Let's manage costs, effectively. But the ways that we do that in managing talent is to homogenize everybody, and to make everybody look the same, because that's the lowest cost way to treat them. And I feel like it's dehumanizing at some level. Many of the processes that would, I suspect, benefit from being extremely human, people that we decide to hire. How do we do performance management for people? How do we exit people when we have to do that? So the benchmark is so-called world-class HR organizations run at about 0.6, 0.7% of sales in terms of what you spend on it. Even non-tech firms today typically spending, 3% of revenues of sales on tech. Is that the right sort of difference between the two things? I don't know. I'm worried about that. So these questions got me and the team very interested on this question about what's actually going on with humans today in the workforce, and what could we do to unleash what turns out to still be quite a little of optimism, but some of that optimism is getting sort of crushed in the day-to-day wheels, and resulting in this very high number of people who are stressed out of work every day.
So it's a call to action, perhaps, broadly across industry to re-engage and do more human connection, maybe in a slightly more structured way, and how you manage and motivate people, and use techniques like, greater active listening and feedback in order to motivate and hopefully just reduce some of that stress, which ultimately, is probably directly correlated to productivity and overall organization goals, right? From a financial perspective. But those things are tied together. They're not necessarily mutually exclusive if they're done right. So, I think that's fascinating.
No, absolutely not. I think they're mutually supportive, actually. And yes, it is that, call to action, and not just on sort of feedback and empathy, but even on the practical details of what an HR management system looks like. And there's lots of work going on around the world. I talk to CHROs all the time, and founders and people who are in talent leadership roles of one sort and another, trying to imbue more flexibility into the systems that they offer their people. And it's so bravo. That's great. Let's keep doing that. What I've come to believe is that our definition of flexibility is not nearly flexible enough. And that flexibility for a 40-year-old woman at work is very different than flexibility for a 60-year-old, older generation worker, or from a 22-year-old Gen Z entering the workforce for the first time. Definitions of flexibility vary quite a bit. So it's not easy. But there are firms doing incredible things, even out of compensation systems. I want more fixed or more variable. I want more equity or more phantom equity versus cash. Firms trying their very hardest to design things that can meet their people where they really want that flexibility. But yeah, I do think there's an unlock. If you can do that, there's an unlock on productivity, retention, satisfaction, and ultimately the thing that I care about and all my clients do, which is the business results.
I've seen I don't know whether this is a true shift, because I don't know the data and whether it's statistically significant, but I've seen moves by some firms. I think KKR does probably the best at promoting this, but in encouraging greater employee ownership, in some of their portcos. When they take a majority investment, or they acquire a company, they look and work with their CHROs to restructure ownership with the employees, to tie them directly to the company goals. That's more famously talked about in the startup or the tech world, right? Where the venture capital is looking to tie employees' motivation and comp together. It's less well known from what I've seen in the more traditional industrial, small and medium sized business world outside of tech. Are you seeing a shift more broadly? And if not, would you like to see more of that?
I see the same thing that you do, very narrowly. And I think that the other than that, not really. Progress is very slow. I think one of the points that was important to us in this is that, what they say, it's like psychology research. The criticism of all psychology research is that it's all executed on first and second year psychology undergraduates. And what we were trying to do in this work is to make sure we were not sort of too self-absorbed with a group of, Western, high income, white collar knowledge workers, because they're fine for the most part. So our research has, manicurists in Brazil and sanitation workers in China and car mechanics in India, people who have not got the slightest chance of getting that kind of level of, of redesign of their compensation system from their firms in their work today. So no, I don't see a kind of a broad-based shift, but I do think the experiments that happen in places like the one you mentioned are very valuable because they eventually might trickle down. If they work, they trickle down. And the idea of aligning ownership with financial rewards is a well-trodden one. But I think broadly speaking, we have a lot of people who, do worry about being properly compensated at work. They worry about job security. They worry about the flexibility that I mentioned earlier. They worry about having friends at work, learning and growing. And all these things vary a little bit by country, by age group, by gender. But the similarities are even more striking than the differences, to be very honest. So that's how we got to this concept of archetypes, Simon, as you know, which cut through gender, country, age to what fundamentally are you about at work? Because no surprise, really, as soon as you think about it, but we're not all motivated by the same things primarily. Now, why that is, that's not my job to explain. I don't have to be a psychologist to observe the fact that people are motivated by different things, but they certainly are. And that's sort of being the basis of which I'm trying to describe things that we can do as leaders and talent managers to get more people more motivated in their jobs, whatever that level of job might be.
What really appeals to me is the applied psychology that comes with this work, right? Because personality types, right, in the form of archetypes has been around since the ancient Greeks, although I think they tied it to bodily functions and fluids, which, was the first attempt. I don't want to, disrespect them for that. And then, later evolutions in the early to mid 1900s with people like Carl Jung, right? It's kind of setting the scene and acknowledging the various differences of people's personalities and the roles that play actually inside their own head. I think that's all fine and good, but actually acknowledging it and then doing something with it, creating a framework and then telling people how to effectively use it in business. I think that's what a lot of people have ultimately been looking for. And you don't, to your point earlier on, you don't need to be, a major in psychology if you're an executive, right? To understand and appreciate what motivates people and that people are different. But working with frameworks that can teach you the best practices, to be more productive or to get greater results, with people with different backgrounds and levels and cultural influences, I think is fantastic. So, do you see this as a shift moving forward? Do you see executives, perhaps maybe even in operations roles or even CFOs starting to take psychology courses or want more guidance on behavioral dynamics, off the back of your book? Or
I don't see people suddenly deciding to retrain in psychology. I don't think it's needed either. I do see a tremendous appetite to understand the levers that can unlock, improved operating performance from the people in service of business results. And this is not some sort of happy clappy, let's make sure everybody's, no, this is about business results, which are a derivative of good strategy and then highly motivated people in good jobs that they have the skills to actually execute. Nothing I have ever said in the book or elsewhere about motivations should make you think that I don't think skills are incredibly important. Skills are the fundamental building block for people being effective in their roles. But I feel skills plus motivations is a more predictable way of understanding paths to success than just skills on its own. So no, I don't see that, but I do see an increased interest. I feel like the existing tools, you're right, there are so many, going back to Jung and MBTI and then, the Shines Anchors and there's Hogan. There's lots of good stuff out there. Some may be a little bit ancient. And we've learned so much about human behavior in the last 106 years since Carl Gustav Jung came up with his 4 dichotomies. We've done so much work on that as a species and how do, things in our brain help us to behave differently. I feel like we needed something more modern, something updated and something just to do with work. I would never be presumptuous enough to kind of, assert something about human beings in their entirety. That's not my domain. But I know a lot about people at work, and so that's what this is all about.
Yeah, that's great. And just so people know that, James is on a book tour right now, but I'm not sure. So you're out on the West Coast. Do you have many more global stops before heading back to Hong Kong?
This is the last stop of this leg, but I have multiple more visits ahead, and I'm very excited because I live in China. There's a Chinese translation coming out in January, so I'm sure that'll have me up in China quite a bit as well. But yes, I've got plenty more next year. That's my hope. That is the plan.
And are you in discussions, or do you have any firms in the AI world that are wanting to leverage the framework or existing software platforms in the HR space?
Yes. I mean, one of the interesting things that I had not expected, shame on me, I should have thought about it, but is obviously there are our clients, and I'm in multiple discussions with them around the world, including some more traditional firms, banks, and so forth. But there's a whole raft of discussion going on with companies that do coaching of one sort or another, both executive coaching, but also more broadly based coaching, including a segment that you would know about, which is AI-based coaching. And there's a proliferation, there's a kind of Cambrian explosion of these firms offering coaching through AI, where the AI can absorb the book, obviously, very quickly, and then use it in the conversations that it has with its coachees. So we've got a number of those situations going on as well. That's exciting. I just hadn't anticipated that as we were doing all this research over the last few years. But it's a very direct way of getting this into the dialogue that's trying to help people understand, why do I hate my boss? Why do I love my boss? Why do I love my peers? What is it that's holding me up from being more productive and successful in my job? Or how do I do more of the things that are really playing to those elements that I'm most motivated by?
Fascinating. Okay, so there's a jamesroot.ai or Archetype Effect.ai that's coming out.
There's no James Root.ai, nor will there ever be. But it's through third-party providers that I'm working with on embedding this into their own systems.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of what's fascinating about that is it takes when you read, you learn, right? So that's one of the reasons I think books are still around, and if anything, have become more popular. It's almost like a resurgence of the vinyl record, right? But with the books, people learn more reading and want to read. Now being able to chat and interact and ask actual questions to the text and the knowledge inside of the book is kind of another evolution that I'd never really anticipated, but I think is a great
fantastic. It's fantastic. Yeah. So, I mean, I've got a few things. There's a little piece in the book where I talk about natural tensions between the 6 archetypes. What can go wrong when an artisan goes up with a giver, things that you should watch out for. But I talked about 10 of those, just the 10 I've seen most frequently in the last couple of years. But, there's 6 by 6, there's a lot more that you can now go and ask a chat GPT. So I'm a this, and the person I'm working with is a that. What do you think I should do to adapt my communication or adjust my expectations in some ways? As you said, it's just very cool that you can go and query the text and the ideas.
Yeah. And if the end goal is it actually helps people to connect with each other faster and more authentically and kind of evolve perhaps faster as a human race, then the outcome is maybe beyond what people are nervous and anxious about. I saw Reid Hoffman did a interesting video where he's kind of connected, or he's interviewing his younger self, which is obviously an AI generated, and it's an image of him that's obviously been taken from I think a college picture. And the younger Reid is talking about his anxiety of the nuclear warfare threat and the stance in Cuba, maybe some of the challenges of his time, probably I assume back in the 70s. And he's just providing counsel and guidance to the younger self. I just thought that was fascinating, really.
Amazing.
But maybe that's where AI will allow us to go is not just have a conversation with our younger self, but talk to ourselves, right? Separately about challenges and anxieties, and be given, real-time counseling and kind of coaching in a business environment. I can imagine it becoming a thing.
Yeah.
But
there's two. I mean, my dream outcome would be there are sort of two readers. One is exactly what you just described, somebody who's interested in themselves at work. I mean, all of us are interested in ourselves, right? That's just a natural thing. But wants to kind of discover a new language or a new sort of algebra to understand the things that they really enjoy and things that they don't at the personal level, but also at the organization level. I don't just say firm, because nonprofits and governments, I've spent time with lots of those as well. People who manage talent in some way, people who lead talent in some way. And I don't mean CEOs, I mean anybody. Team leader running a small team of 5 or 6 people doing a project. They can also, I think, benefit from just other appreciation about what's going on with motivations of the people around them. So sort of two different audiences. I don't know whether that's going to work or not, but we'll see.
Well, it's a fascinating time, and like I said, the timing of your book coming out and being able to kind of share these conversations with you is really quite important. I think in general, these are good things for people to be discussing, and an important time. So thank you, James. I hope the rest of the book tour goes well, and jet lag doesn't affect you too much when you're traveling around the world. But I appreciate you coming on. Anyone who is listening, then you can hear me say go and get a copy of the Archetype Effect. But anyone who's watching online on YouTube or one of the clips, this is a copy right here. But fantastic read, extremely timely. So I appreciate you coming on. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. Pleasure to talk to you.